He could have had it all. At the top of his game, he controlled the Walt Disney Company and could have sat in the mouse's chair for the next decade. But three big sins cost Bob Chapek his job, and today, we're going to explain them for you right now. Hello and hiya, everybody. Entertainment Explained. The culture curve, we keep you ahead of it. That's the goal here. And joining us to help us do just that is the one and only Valiant Renegade, who, Mr. Renegade, you put out one of the most fantastic videos yesterday covering the Disney board, covering all the shenanigans that are going on. It is quite the mess. How are you doing today in light of all that is going on over at Disney?
To be honest with you, I'm running on about 4 hours of sleep. That video took me between conceptualization to finalization and loading it onto YouTube, probably somewhere on the order of about 7 to 8 hours.
But you know, it was worth it. It's a tour de force. It really is. It's a tour de force of everything that people don't know about the Disney board, that don't know about Robert Iger and what's been going on. I highly recommend, after you finish this video, ladies and gentlemen, after you finish it, you have got to go over to the Valiant Renegade channel and you've got to go watch that video. It's like a college course that's not painful, explaining everything about Disney so that you can understand the movers and the shakers at the company. So it's a major deal. So congratulations, Renegade, on a fantastic video, one of your very best.
Well, I appreciate that. I try to dial it back to kind of a more introductory level because I know there's a lot of folks out there, and even some probably watching this video here on your channel, Pro. A lot of folks aren't terribly familiar with the situation. I mean, there's some out there that have been following us and my channel and now your channel for some time, following the news on that Park Place for some time. But there's a lot of newcomers. There's a lot of new faces that are looking at this going, boy, this sounds crazy. They don't know who any of these people are. They don't know the history that's been going on the last even just 6 months, let alone the last several years. So that's what that video was designed to do. And I know we're going to talk some more about that here today because there's a lot of stuff I didn't get to cover in that video because it was so broad scoped. If I had tried to cover every piece that happened in the last 24 hours with that report, with the THR, I mean, it would have been 2 hours long. So
yeah, it's a fantastic video. What we're going to try to do now is for all of you audience members out there, and thank you for being here. Make sure you click the like button, subscribe, share this thing out, hit the notification bell, all of those things. But what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to go back in time now because there have been theories. People have been asking questions. What happened with Bob Chapek? What happened to the CEO who had the shortest tenure of all time at the Walt Disney Company? And why is it that the board fully supported him, renewed his contract with a raise early, unanimously, and then months later threw him away as if he was hot garbage? Well, after this latest SEC filing from Disney, which is apparently for the House of Mouses where they discard their garbage and put it out for full display, but this latest SEC filing, we basically now know. I mean, there may be some skeletons in a closet somewhere that will come out later.
Sure.
But really and truly, we've got sufficient evidence now to know what happened.
Oh, yeah. There's enough there to put the puzzle pieces together. And like I stated in the video that I did, we had a lot of missing gaps. We were theorizing, but that was based on education, training, and experience. And then that SEC report came out and filled in a lot of the holes. So definitely, still some more to go, but what we've got right now has been pretty substantial.
Filled in those holes also proved that we were on the right track on the things that we were saying. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time and let's go find out where are the key places that former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Chapek, where did he mess up? What are the unforgivable sins that all you future CEOs out there of major entertainment corporations that you can avoid and learn from? Because Mr. Chapek, it's too late for him, but it's not too late for you. Let's dive in. It was not so long ago that we saw Mr. Chapek in what has sometimes been described as a hostage situation, held in contempt by his own Human Resources Department, his own DEI department ran by Ton Newton, which was overseeing a program called Reimagine Tomorrow. And unfortunately for Mr. Chapek, what happened was that it became a situation where his video was leaked that showed him in a very, shall we say, compromised position. Not in the way that you might hear about from a
I was about to
politician.
say, we might want to say, be careful with the word compromising position when we're talking.
Compromised position in that he was he came across in sort of a subservient way, right? He came across as someone who was not in the high position of a CEO, but rather he came across kind of groveling. So, Valiant, tell us a little bit about how we got into that situation leading up to the video, and then we're going to share that out so everybody can get to watch it.
Well, the short version is that Disney got involved in politics, not just in the sense that we think of as Hollywood socio-political messaging in a movie or a television show. No, Disney actually decided to jump in to actual, real, live, real-time politics, particularly in the case of the state of Florida with House Bill
and a very hot situation too. It's not like it was politics about something mundane. This was something that really drove emotional responses in nearly every family you could possibly talk to.
Yeah, the governor and the Florida legislature were very much on one side solidly of this, overwhelmingly, as a matter of fact, as you can tell by the votes that this bill received, 1557, but also the voters of Florida. Now, I continue to remind everybody that the first response out of Bob Chapek on this legislation, as has been the case with every other piece of legislation, was silence, nothing. Why would we get involved in this? I'm not going to say anything. This is not what we do here. That didn't go over well, and certain small but very vocal factions in the Walt Disney Company decided to wait until the bill had passed the legislature entirely to raise a stink. And then Chapek, shortly after, during an earnings call, made a statement saying, look, we knew about it. We didn't want to really get involved publicly. We figured we'd work behind the scenes, blah, blah, blah. Again, trying to this is not what I want to do as Disney CEO, but let me go ahead and quell some of the angst that my employees, or a small faction of my employees, although again, very vocal, are screaming right now. That wasn't good enough. Then out came the big political guns, as it were, pointed at Mr. Chapek from folks in Disney, mainly the folks in California Disney, not really so much the folks in Florida Disney, as was evidenced by the numbers of the folks at the walkout, so on and so forth, until he made an apology letter, an apology tour, and then, of course, we had the just convenient timing of the Reimagine Tomorrow just misery fest that Disney conducted, I guess.
That's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And so at the time, Robert Iger had come out and put out a tweet that had really put Chapek in a bad situation, because the tweet had essentially said that were he still the leader of Disney, Disney would not have acted the way they did when the legislation was being deliberated.
Yes.
So that put Chapek in a bad situation. But then also, we knew that there was leadership from the company in this group called the Disney Walkout Group, which had its own social media account, which had a little graphic that was a Mickey Mouse fist raised up. And you can get the idea from that. But we knew leadership was involved in that because they had a few faux pas when they sort of let the cat out of the bag. Maybe they did it on purpose now. We're starting to think that maybe they had that kind of chutzpah. But he was put into a situation where he was going to have to go one way or the other. Like, there was no longer the ability to just sit on the sideline. But what he probably should have said is, he should have stuck to his guns and said, Disney is an apolitical corporation. We are not getting involved. We do have our particular values that we will display and put out there, and we will do things behind the scenes, but we're not going to discuss this publicly. That might have been a way to save him. What is not savable, though, is this sin, which is when he came out with a rather groveling apology, and this was then leaked out by Christopher Rufo. The tweet reads, this is back from quite a while ago, April 7th.
Oh, April, yeah, almost a year ago.
Disney CEO Bob Chapek grovels, apologizes, and pledges to be a better ally for the LGBTQ plus community. He delegated the company's moral authority to the LGBTQIA plus advisory council, and now those internal activists have taken him as an ideological hostage. Let's watch just a little bit of this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day for this very important session. By now, I hope you've all read my most recent note, in which I pledge to be a better ally for the LGBTQ plus community, apologize for not being an ally that you needed me to be, and committed to ensuring that our company lives up to its values. I meant every word, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I know that we've got work to do, and that work starts with listening. I'm glad the company will hear from today's panel of LGBTQ plus employees, and I hope that you are as impacted as I've been by the voices that I've heard over the past few weeks. I've read many emails that have been sent, spoken with LGBTQ plus employees and their allies, met with advocacy groups, and convened my own leadership team. And I have been taken by the honesty, the openness, and the urgency of their stories. I want you to know that your words have made a real impact on me. I understand that.
And we'll stop there. Let me just say that they had a real impact on him as well, beyond just words, because guess what? This would lead to him being canned and walked out the door. It turns out that cowering just does not work. Now let's put aside the political and the socio issues that exist here, right? The cultural stuff, let's put it aside. And let's just say you cannot go in front of a video like that and cower in that way to any political movement, left, right, center, far left, far right, doesn't matter, because that was not enough. And what happened there is after the video, that was the beginning salvo of a series of workshops and videos where all kinds of things came out as a result of him handing this over to his DEI and Human Resources Department. All kinds of things came out that were so damaging to the company that even to this day, it's driving families from going to see a Disney movie. Reminder, we've had 3 straight animated flops out of Disney.
Yep.
And part of that's coming from stuff in that where, for example, we had a lady come out and say that she had a not so secret agenda. Well, yay, doesn't that make everyone want to go see your movies with your kids? Or better yet, does that make them want to leave their kids to be babysat by Disney Plus late at night? Any thoughts on the video? How bad was this?
A couple of things on it that I want to remind folks, and if you couldn't tell just by watching his eyes, reading his body language, his demeanor, clearly that was a statement he was reading off of a cue card that he didn't write. That was something that was prepared for him, and my opinion, based on a lot of obvious body language, he was basically there with a, let's call it a figurative corporate pistol pressed against his head to go ahead and read this tripe and basically try to appease, again, small handful, but rather powerful and vocal folks at Disney. But yes, you're absolutely, he should have stuck to his guns. He should have just taken the fallout from inside, because apparently, as we know now, that there were already people out, one in particular, that were namely angling for his job. So, I mean, he was going to be under fire regardless. So he should have stuck to his guns, because at least he would have had the fans and the audiences, the paying customers out there, largely on his side, because, again, the state of Florida was all very much in favor of that bill and not what the Disney employees wanted.
And let's just reiterate, too, it doesn't matter what political movement exists. It doesn't matter what cultural movement exists. If you as a leader make a video like that, what you do is you subjugate yourself to the other forces in your company. It doesn't even matter if it's an argument about where the water cooler will be placed. Okay, for all of you mid-management people out there trying to figure out how to deal with issues inside your office, anytime you do something like that, anytime you do a video like that that puts you below someone else in that kind of way, you are going to have major problems, because you've inverted the power hierarchy. And when you give somebody that kind of control over you, where you're willing to come out with a video that's compared to a hostage video, they don't want to give that power up. That's why that is the unforgivable sin number 1. A king without his knight is no good and unprotected, and that is exactly what happened to Bob Chapek once he lost his right-hand man, that being Jeff Morrell. Valiant, tell us a little bit about this guy. Who was he, and why was he so important to Bob Chapek?
Well, Jeff Morrell had spent years working at very high-level politics as a spokesman, namely for the United States Pentagon. I mean, he worked with the Department of Defense, very well-connected individual, had been doing it a very long time, had worked in that capacity through several different administrations, both Republican and Democrat, to my best recollection. And he was somebody that was in a very good position as the chief of Disney corporate communications to be able to not only communicate with, but communicate effectively and connect through his already existing long-standing relationships with a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle, namely a lot of politicians in Florida, including the governor, Ron DeSantis, including many of the legislators there, and then around the country itself as well. So he was a very good pickup. In fact, I did a video on Jeff Morrell when he came aboard, when Chapek announced his hiring, and I was thrilled. I thought it was a brilliant acquisition for Chapek and for Disney at the time. Of course, we know how short-lived that was now, and that related, of course, to sin number one.
Even shorter than Chapek's tenure.
Yes.
Now, the other thing is that Morrell was seen as a moderate, right? He comes out of the wing of the Republican Party that's sort of aligned with Jeb Bush.
Yep.
And so he's a little bit milquetoast. But that wasn't good enough. And so as he was trying to keep Chapek apolitical, remember, we're not talking about Disney was nowhere close to being affirmative in the conservative direction. Let's just say that. There was never a question of Disney taking an affirmative conservative position. That's never been even in the sphere of ideas that they have contemplated. What they were actually discussing, what Jeff Morrell was trying to do with the communications team at Disney at that time, was keep it out of the fight. And
Right.
what he was doing is trying to follow, or at least lead at that time, right? He was trying to lead companies like Universal, companies like everybody who runs Busch Gardens. You don't hear about any of these other companies in Florida getting into this situation. They stayed out of it. And that was Jeff Morrell's suggestion to do so.
And that was
And
not
what
for lack of
happened-
trying by those groups either. They were pressuring
big
publicly on
time.
Twitter for Universal and everybody else to jump in, and Universal just wisely ignored them all.
Now, when Chapek did the 180, when he cowered, which we said was sin number one, that's the unforgivable sin because it set off the dominoes. Now he was underneath his predecessor, Iger. Iger's now above him because Iger criticized him. And what happened? Chapek had to tuck his tail and lay down and grovel on video, right?
Mhm.
Before all the employees. Okay. But then what happened as that 180 continued? It didn't just stop there. You had Disney coming out and saying, oh, we're going to take political action now. We're going to try and become a political player in this area. We're going to suspend political donations that we've been making for 50 years. And as a result, what did Jeff Morrell do?
Jeff Morrell said, see ya, and left.
That's exactly right. And he took a big chunk of change with him, Valiant. Did you see the Wall Street Journal article?
He did. Yeah, he did. And they're lamenting, this about executive pay and all this kind of stuff. Well, the man had a contract, and the fact that that he was getting paid out that contract seems to suggest to me that perhaps Disney violated some terms or felt it better to just go ahead and pay his contract out, regardless of the fact that he left. Or maybe they did him a favor and said, we'll terminate you because you want to leave because we want to pay. I don't know. But the fact that the man got paid, I think, is interesting in and of itself as much as he did.
And then when he came on board, Disney obviously thought he was worth that kind of money.
Oh,
I mean, they thought he was going to stay for a lot longer, but he's really good at what he does, and he provided some specialized abilities to Disney that they just couldn't replace. In fact, what they did after this is just amazing for everybody who's not familiar. When Jeff Morrell, remember, this is a moderate individual. Okay? This is a guy who was supporting Jeb Bush. This is a guy who had connections with Florida Republicans, but at the same time, he can work on either side of the fence. When he leaves, they replace him with not centrist. Let's just say it that way. Okay, I don't want to get political, but definitely not in the middle Democratic strategist. What was that person's name, Valiant? Do you recall?
I think it was Christina Shaki, I think is how you say
That's
her
right.
name.
You got it. You got it. And so, and we won't get into the political stuff here, but suffice to say, Chapek at that point, due to his decisions to cower and then to fortify that cowering, right? Fortify his 180 and going against his communications guy, that did two things. There are two areas where Chapek then became vulnerable, and this is why this is the unforgivable sin. You can't lose your right-hand man. Chapek was being defended on the entertainment front. On the entertainment front, he had set up a system where Kareem Daniel was filtering out the stuff at Disney coming from the creatives that was going to get Disney in trouble and lower their profits. But Chapek didn't want to get his hands dirty. He doesn't want to be in there telling Pixar, no, you can't put this type of kiss in. He wants somebody else taking the heat. So he had that person. Okay. Now, once you take out Jeff Morrell, who we'll discuss in just a second, once you take him out, now Kareem Daniel is thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, what's going to happen to me? Jeff Morrell, though, was the guy who was supposed to protect him. He was protecting his flank when it came to politics and communications.
Yep.
When he leaves, Chapek is completely opened up now, because what happens is he gets a new communications person brought in. Who decided to bring this person in? This person who's not in the middle and is a politically active strategist. We don't know that. But she comes in.
Doubtful it was Chapek on his own accord.
That's right. And Chapek, at that point, now he's got a communications member who probably is not even on his side. So this was a major flaw. Never let your right-hand man, never let your second in command go, especially when it comes to communications and politics. Final thoughts on this, Sin Valiant?
Now, I was going to say, I think you kind of hit it. And the big thing with Jeff Morrell is that his connections and his relationship with the politicians that he had cultivated over decades of Washington, D.C. experience, those relationships were vastly, by orders of magnitude, more valuable than anything that Disney could have possibly offered at that point. Because if those relationships had been damaged, it wouldn't have mattered if he had stayed or left Disney. He would not have been able to any longer be effective. His decades of career experience and cultivation would have been blown apart within days. He had to leave to protect his own career, and I think it was a wise decision. So, I mean, from that standpoint, what else can you do? But you cannot lose the guy who is supposed to take direction from you, Bob Chapek, and help you implement your vision, and then get the media and the public and the politicians on your side to do it, and then trade a guy like that in for Christina Shaki that arguably was probably put in place to change Bob Chapek versus Chapek.
Great point.
Yeah, I mean, we did a 180. That's not what a communications director is supposed to do. You know, whereas the communications director now is basically, she's not just vocalizing the message of the CEO. She is, she's structuring it all on her own, and the CEO is meant to really follow along behind her.
Yeah, and just to my final word on how bad this hurt Disney. Had they not lost Jeff Morrell, they might not have lost Reedy Creek District, which will now be under the control of Florida, the state.
Very correct, yeah.
All right, that's our sin number 2. Finally, folks, if you have sinned in the first 2 ways, you do not want to do the trifecta, which will land you into entertainment purgatory, also known as a pink slip and out the door. So the third sin is indeed that when you have committed all of these problems and set yourself on fire, figuratively, you've got to protect yourself as quickly as possible. And in this case, when a friendly investor reached out to Disney, Chapek seems not to have been able to implement getting that person into a position of power fast enough. I don't even know if it was possible to do so, but Nelson Peltz is the third strike when it comes to Disney leadership and how quickly they move to get rid of Bob Chapek. Valiant, lead us through sort of this process. You've done an incredible video on it. Tell us, starting with Peltz reaching out, I think it was to Mrs. Chang, is that correct, on the board?
Well, he first reached out to Mr. Chapek directly back in early and mid-July, then reached out almost immediately to Ike Perlmutter on the same day, still hanging
Hey,
around.
now hold there for a minute, Valiant.
Yeah.
When was Chapek renewed by the board?
Well, we'll get to that, but Chapek was renewed, at least the public reports came out on June 28th, I believe it was, when it hit the media. So probably
Okay, so shortly thereafter is when we're saying that the first
2
communication
weeks.
started.
2 weeks after that.
And let's remember that Chapek had full unanimous
Or at least as it was said.
That's
to be
right.
unanimous, yeah.
Okay, so we're trying to figure out how did things shift so quickly. All right, keep going.
So July 11th, July 15th, that's when the initial communications, Mr. Peltz of Trian Media Group, or Trian Management Group, excuse me, met with Bob Chapek at the Disney Hotel, New York.
I don't mean to cut you off again, but pause here for again. Valiant, tell us, what was the warning that Peltz gave to Chapek? What did he tell him was coming for him if he did not get him into leadership?
Well, Peltz's comments revolved around the fact that Chapek was going to be facing some headwinds, which I found to be curious because if he had
How
been
did he
renewed,
know? That's exactly right.
well, if he had been renewed 2 weeks earlier, what possible headwinds could there be at this point, if not for the fact that somebody like Nelson Peltz would have probably known that somebody like Mr. Robert Iger was working behind the scenes, as we have been saying
right.
for months.
And it tells you, Valiant, here's what it tells you. It tells you that in the elite circles, there was already talk about this, that they have known that there's been murmuring, let's say, about this Iger attempt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And that's when Ike Perlmutter, currently the chairman of Marvel, a chairman that has basically no power, it's a ceremonial position. Kevin Feige is complete control. Ike Perlmutter, who was basically run off by Kevin Feige at the hand of Bob Iger back in 2015 from Marvel, from having any power at Marvel.
I'm sure there's no hard feelings there, by the way.
None whatsoever, I'm sure. But the fact of the matter is that it was Ike Perlmutter a few days later that made the point of starting to talk about the fact that, listen, if we did not get Mr. Peltz on the board, then Robert Iger would be back. This was in mid-July that Ike Perlmutter made the statement.
Say it again, Valiant. Say it again. Everybody needs to hear this. Say it one more time.
In mid-July, within the same couple of days that Nelson Peltz was communicating with Bob Chapek, that was communicating with Miss Amy Chang. And by the way, the reason, and I forgot to mention this in the video, that he was communicating out of all the board members that he could have picked, the reason he called
Mutual history here.
Yes, they both knew each other from Procter and Gamble.
Right. So he may have trusted her a little bit, which turns out not to have gone so well.
Well, that's why he was selective in who he talked to. He also talked to Ms. Safra Katz, who was the chairman of the audit committee. Ike Perlmutter, I think, also spoke to her. And then Horatio Gutierrez, who is the top attorney of the Walt Disney Company. But it was on July 15th that Ike Perlmutter made the statement to some of these folks, listen, if we do not get Mr. Peltz here on this board of directors for the Walt Disney Company, Robert Iger will come back. This was from Disney's own statement in their own SEC filing that is what Mr. Ike Perlmutter said. There's no reason.
It's unbelievable that it's in there. It's unbelievable it's in there.
Well, there's a lot of disclosure requirements, and if those things could ever, I mean, look, I'm glad they put it all out there.
Me too. I love it.
You have to put a lot of that kind of stuff out there because of disclosure, and you can see how even little simple things like that have to be disclosed. But that is where we are. And sure enough, lo and behold, well, gosh darn it. Like
November comes.
4 months later.
Winter is coming, Bob Chapek. Winter is coming.
4 months later.
So
4 months
again,
later.
Let's recall this in, everybody. You got to move fast. You're already in heat. You're already in trouble. People are already nipping at your heels.
Yeah.
Maybe the board is showing that they've got your back. But in fact, it turns out that Peltz was exactly right. Chapek was in deep trouble, and he did not move quickly enough.
Yeah. And Peltz was very much in favor of Bob Chapek staying as CEO. He was very much in favor of Chapek's renewal. He was very much against the rescindance or the resurgence, excuse me, of Bob Iger. Very much against that. And But he's made it clear since then. If he wants a board seat, he's not going to show up and immediately put something out to fire Bob Iger on the spot.
Well, why
and get
would
rid of
you?
him.
He's only there for 2 years, less than
Right.
2 years.
Well, of course, Peltz believes he's going to try to stick around longer, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, well, he's got a history of that, I would say.
Yeah, I would too. But Peltz brings up some very interesting, points that I think are worthy of consideration. It's a lot of stuff I've talked about on Valiant Renegade that's going wrong at Disney. Mr. Peltz, I'll be happy to take any, job requests or applications at this point. So no, just all joking aside.
So later on then, Valiant, is there any evidence at this point that Chapek or anybody in his circle, which by the way was incredibly small at this point, I mean, everybody was gunning to get him, and we'll talk about why in just a moment, but is there any indication that people around him that actually supported him, we can count that on your hand, but that they were actively working with Peltz to try to get him into a position of power? Or did this just kind of sit for 4 months?
Well, most of the folks involved at the board level were at least seemingly resistant, at least the ones that were mentioned in this SEC report. Certainly the folks at the executive level, the top portions of the executive level, people that were not named Bob Chapek, were seemingly against Mr. Peltz, namely CFO Christine McCarthy. Big time. There really didn't seem to be much statement there about Mr. Gutierrez, but seemingly he was very much against Mr. Peltz being there too. Susan Arnold, same thing. There was a lot of back and forth with, we just don't think it's right at this time. We don't want to hear it. And Peltz kept saying, there's going to be, if you don't, proxy fight.
That's been amped up a bit, wouldn't you say? I mean, they came out a couple of days ago and released a statement that's frankly just insulting to a man who is often considered to have the second best mutual fund in terms of beating the S&P 500. They came out and released a statement that just says flat out, he's not qualified. He's not skilled in the areas necessary. Oh my gosh.
I found that really, not so much insulting to him as it is insulting to the intelligence of anybody that reads that statement from Disney.
Desperate, Valiant.
Yeah, it really is. Look at the makeup of the Walt Disney Board of Directors and tell me who on there is running another mega entertainment or theme park company.
Well, there's a particular chart that we'll talk about in a later video, Valiant. There's a chart, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But it insults one's intelligence to even look at it.
Yes.
So let's talk about then, why is it? Okay, we know that Chapek did not move fast enough. He's got 4 months between the point where he's told by somebody who's big time in all the when you're talking about the stock market, when you're talking about corporate leadership, this guy, he's got his ear plugged in, right? He knows what's going on. And he's got 4 months from the point that guy says to him, Iger is coming for you. That's essentially what he's saying. Iger's already got the first domino back when he made
Perlmutter
Chapek
outright said it. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, and we know that he's a proxy for Peltz, right? He's coming in as an advocate. So we know who's saying that. But why is it that the board is so against this additional seat, even to the point that they would replace the chair of the board and then not replace the seat itself, thus limiting the board of directors to try to knock that out?
Yeah,
let's take a look at that.
Yeah, when they canned Bob Chapek, they also eliminated his actual seat on the board, so it went to 11 in that moment. So that's just it, and they brought in this other newer board member to appease another activist investor, but Nelson Peltz wasn't having any of that.
So what we know is that Bob Iger and his cohorts, they have a very particular belief system when it comes to the world. They like playing around with China. They like it a lot. Mm-hmm. They like all of this DEI and ESG stuff. People, if you don't know what it is, go look it up. But they really like that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they also are in a particular political party for the most part. In fact, if you go back and look at Disney's contributions, you'll find that the people who work for Disney, now not Disney itself, that's different, but the people who work for Disney, it's like 91% of their contributions go to one political party that tends to be in favor of those things we just discussed. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not judging positive or negative on that. But what I am saying is that Mr. Peltz and his group, Trian Partners, they have a very different history regarding politics and all of that. Give us a quick rundown, Valiant, and then we're going to look at this ESG thing from Triumph Partners.
As far as Disney's involvement with, or excuse me, with Trian's involvement in this, or
just as far as Peltz and his political background, what are some of the things that might be distasteful to the Disney board?
Sorry, I was reading the ESG statement while you were saying that. Yeah, it was very different than most others, as we'd mentioned earlier. But as far as Peltz is concerned, his history certainly runs counter to what you have come to expect from Disney's political campaign contribution history. Mr. Peltz actually did a fundraiser for one Donald Trump back in 2020 during his presidential reelection bid. In fact, he hosted it at his super posh Palm Beach home. It's a $10 million fundraiser. So Peltz's politics and the politics of many, not all, but many of the higher-ups, and certainly probably many of the board members, probably don't get along.
They're at odds. So let's look, because one of the things that Disney has really been a proponent of and participated in greatly, and perhaps because of the level of involvement the institutional investors, the biggest ones like Vanguard and BlackRock, have with Disney. Disney is a big proponent of ESG. So that's environmental initiatives, social initiatives, and governance initiatives. And usually what that's talking about is it's talking about things that tend to go into a particular political direction. So run us real quick, Valiant. What's ESG? Just for the folks at home.
I mean, as far as the official corporate definition, this is, I mean, it's like you said, environmental, social, and governance. They're looking for a company to be environmentally responsible. Again, a very vague term, whatever that means. Socially conscious, and again, we've seen the disparity between what one company like Trian will consider that to mean versus another company like, say, Disney. And then governance initiatives, doing what's right for the community and the stockholders and the stakeholders. It's basically just a lot of pablum. It's platitudes. It's hogwash. But it is.
But there are grades given. That
there
needs
are
to be
grades.
said too.
Yes, there are scores given. You can go to places like Yahoo Finance. In fact, I think they even cite them there. You can go to any company's publicly stock page and see what it's doing in the stock market today. And then somewhere on that page, there's a little ESG score.
Right, and all these companies are trying to get their little ESG scores up. But if you look at Triumph Partners, again, this is Peltz, right? This is his group. This is the one that they do not want on the board, and we've talked about the political differences. This is what he is bringing to the table. Let's just look through this real quick and see if this matches up with any kind of ESG you've ever heard before. Because what's funny about this is that Triumph Partners, they say that they're all for ESG. Then you look at it and you're like, oh, well, you're for it because it looks nothing like the ESG of everything else we're seeing. Here's what environmental initiatives produce more environmentally friendly products. Great. Improve the sustainability of supply chains. Interesting. Promote the more efficient use of natural renewable resources through the implementation of innovative solutions, food production, manufacturing, and other industrial processes. Now, typically, what you would see in that little section for various corporations is you would see net zero carbon emissions. You would see things about solar power, et cetera.
Save the polar bears. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. In the social initiatives, pay attention here to how much is not at all about social things per se. Refreshing the consumer company product offerings to reflect consumer or customer demand for healthier products. Support the investment of capital. Research and development programs and marketing plans as part of the effort to enhance sustainable long-term earnings growth and create jobs at our portfolio companies. Facilitate the resolution of disputes between labor and management. There's literally nothing in there that is related to the social issues that most companies talk about.
No. There's nothing in there about racial diversity quotas, ethnic diversity quotas. There's nothing in there about LGBTQ diversity quotas. There's nothing. I mean, that is just plain dull, boring. We're going to throw the most 30,000 foot words at you, just so this is as vague as possible. But it sounds good, and it satisfies the what we need to do to put ESG on this website to get some certain people off our case. That's the bottom line of what that page is.
You know, when this thing with Chapek happened, I mean, on the very first night, I said this has to do with ESG, and this has to do with Chapek wanting to cut where he's not supposed to cut.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yep.
now appears to me that he had an ally who wanted power at Disney, whose ESG statements are completely misaligned with what Iger wants, with what the rest of the board probably wants, and are completely misaligned with the institutional investors who we now know, per a Wall Street Journal article, that's who Christine McCarthy was meeting with in the days after the infamous earnings call with Chapek, and then resulted in eventually the firing of Bob Chapek. So,
Mhm.
in summary, on this final sin, ladies and gentlemen, if you've already made two boo-boos, you better get some friends on your side really fast. And it doesn't look like Chapek was able to do that. He was lagging behind, although something spurred the board into quick action, and maybe that was him beginning to reach out to find some help. What do you think, Valiant?
I think it was. I think it was at that point they had floundered their way through the events of March regarding the Florida politics. They had then misstepped, I think, or at least they felt like there had been some sort of misstep, at least publicly, with the issues they had over the summer with poor performance in the box office. Let's be honest, especially with Lightyear. But they had kind of made their own mess, and then in came these, fun little excuses that inexplicably, an earnings call, that Chapek personally didn't perform up to par on this earnings call, which
In which Christine McCarthy would have known the entire time what the earnings call was going to have.
exactly.
She
And
knew
even
every bit of that leading
Yeah.
up to it.
even the Hollywood Reporter article that came out that I referenced in my video said as much. It's like it's ridiculous to assume that Christine McCarthy and the board was not aware of these numbers and would everything that was in the script for that report that was going to be delivered, for that was on November 8th.
Well, you and I often say that the audience we have on Sunday evenings is the highest IQ on the internet. And I know that everybody in that audience is
Mhm.
smart enough to realize that the chief financial officer for the Disney company didn't come into an earnings report and walk away and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe these numbers we just reported on." That
Right.
didn't happen.
No, this was excuse driven. There were a lot of bad actors behind the scene, no pun intended, that obviously were, as I said before, they were gunning for Chapek's job, or at least to get him out of his job. And it was quite a few. And again, go back and watch the Reimagine Tomorrow videos that Christopher Rufo leaked. Not the one of Chapek himself, but the one of everybody else. A lot of those everybody else's were the ones that were driving a lot of this. And that torch and pitchfork at the front of the line was being carried by Bob Iger, who now we know that probably still had a paid consultant position at Disney, which is why he never left his C-suite office. And was still sitting there and doing his job advising sitting pretty advising Disney to get rid of his successor, apparently.
And that's something important there, Valiant. This is a nice thing to have at the end of the video for people who've been hanging in there. That's something that most people don't know. So Iger was under contract this whole time, right?
It would seem so. The report that Nelson Peltz made on his website, Restore the Magic, which is all everything that he thinks is wrong with the Walt Disney Company right now, basically. One of the line items in there is the succession history, or at least the entire history of Bob Iger. And in there was a notation that in 2017, when his contract was renewed, part of his retirement deal was that upon his retirement as CEO, he would be granted a 3-year contract with the Walt Disney Company as a consultant. So there you go. I mean, even if they count 2020 when he didn't really leave and stayed on as a co-CEO, but let's say he stayed on as a co-CEO at that point and he was working under that 3-year term. He was still in his 3rd year in 2022 then. Or
That's right.
it just began in 2022. We don't know. Maybe it began in 20. There's no way to know.
Which would then mean, Valiant, if he's under contract. We don't know for sure, but let's just take Peltz at his word and say that it's right.
Yeah.
If that's true, then Iger's sitting there insubordinating the CEO of the company in a mutiny attempt that turned out to be true. So, lesson for the final sin for all of you future CEOs out there: if you have enemies behind the gate, find a friend real fast. Don't wait around.
Yeah.
All right, Valiant. Final thoughts as we wrap this up. And let me say to everybody, thank you for watching. Click that like button, click the share button, subscribe if you haven't already, click the notification bell. But Valiant, final thoughts, and tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on my own channel at Valiant Renegade here on YouTube, and at Valiant Renegade, just drop the E. Over on Twitter, it's 2 L's in Valiant, not 1. Stop telling me I'm spelling it wrong. No, I'm not. But
That's
as
that
far
New
as
Orleans English, I believe.
no, that's a long story to that one. But my final thought is this, is that the biggest lesson here to learn for Bob Chapek, and especially regarding, in this case, Bob Iger, if you're going to strike the king, you better kill the king. That's it.
Well said.